Welcome, everybody, to the Finance Essentials Podcast. I am your host, Danny Hudson. Welcome to this beautiful Wednesday. The weather's starting to get a little chilly outside, kind of reminding everybody of wintertime, which is nice. First off, let me say thank you to everybody for tuning in this week. Hopefully it's going to be a good show. Hopefully you'll get something out of it. If you get the chance to, feel free to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Might be somewhere around over here, something like that. Also, too, don't forget to leave a comment, maybe a like, and if you get something out of it, and if you like the show, by all means, please feel free to share it with somebody that you think might be able to get something out of it as well. And then also, too, I know we've mentioned it in the past. As far as the webinar goes, I do have pretty much the webinar done. I'm hoping to get it recorded tomorrow. I've got a couple of little tweaks and stuff to make, but I should be able to get that out tomorrow. And then hopefully the marketing and everything related to that's going to start sometime within the next few weeks. So be on the lookout, and I'll go over it a little bit more next week. And then obviously an invitation to all of you loyal listeners out there to sign up. Hopefully you get something out of it, and it's something that you guys will want to see more of. And if it is, let me know. I'm all about trying to provide value. So by all means, please feel free to let me know what you think. So this week, I wanted to address a topic. It's been discussed before, sort of. But now that the election has pretty much been decided, it seems to have come up again, and that is the issue of student loan forgiveness. And what I want to do on today's show is kind of explain to you why you can't necessarily just forgive student loan debt. That's not exactly the way it works. And we're going to look at that and talk about it, especially regarding from a financial perspective. Because again, that's the way my brain works. That's what the show is about. It's about finance and understanding those small nuances and financial details. So if you guys are not super familiar, one of the things that Joe Biden had campaigned on was forgiving approximately $10,000 in student loan debt. Which for the most part, a lot of people that do have student loan debt, it tends to fall under that threshold. It's still below the average, but again, a lot of people out there do have typically tend to have less than 10,000. So where we wanted to start out was an article that was actually from Fox Business, and it was written by Audrey Conklin, and the title of it was "Forgive Student Loan Debt. The top 40% of American households would benefit the most. The top 40% of U.S. households owe about 60% of the outstanding educational debt." So what she talks about in there is kind of the demographic breakdowns as far as, these guys own this much of the student loan debt, these guys own this much. This is kind of how it would play out if this student loan debt was forgiven. And part of it is because there is a very big, wide range of thought when it comes to these student loans. For example, again, I mentioned Joe Biden talks about 10% or $10,000 forgiven. And then Elizabeth Warren, who was also running for president, put together a proposal that would forgive up to $50,000 in student loan debt. And as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, there are also other people out there, your Bernie Sanders, your AOC types, that basically want to wipe it all out, and then also to provide free college, going forward. One thing to keep in mind too is that obviously there are some perils as far as free college, for everybody. But one of the ones that a lot of people don't talk about is that we essentially already have one of the largest percentages in terms of people who actually go to college. I believe last time I looked, the number was around 40%. And so when we talk about free college, for one, nothing's free. But two, a lot of other countries that do offer state-sponsored college, which is essentially what we would be calling free college, their percentages in terms of enrollment are still about the same. So it's not like Germany has an 80% college enrollment percentage, right? Where they have double the amount of people that are in their population that are college educated. That's not the way it works. What you would have is if you were to implement a system of free college, you would still only have so many colleges and so many universities to be able to fill. Now, obviously, more would pop up, but personally, I think what you would find is you would find a severe decrease in terms of populations at places like community college. A lot of people, especially kids, now people that are older, maybe they want to go back to school, and so they'll go to a community college. We're not necessarily talking about that, that group. But people who are graduating high school that may not necessarily have the funds to attend a 4-year university, or maybe they need to work through it, or maybe they're not exactly sure what they want to do, so they would choose a 2-year school and then transfer to a 4-year school, later on. Now, why do that if it's all paid for? So if you've got a college, a community college where 80% of your students are under the ages of 21, why would those kids that are there want to continue to go to a community college when they can just go to a 4-year college? What they would find, and what we would find if this was to actually happen, is that the requirements for these universities and for these 4-year colleges would drastically increase, because now what you have is you have a pool of applicants that are all vying for the same positions. So you may find a slightly higher percentage of people already that are enrolled that would be enrolled. But for the most part, it's not like this is all of a sudden going to happen to where 100% of the population is going to have a college education. So the long way to get around and bring it back full circle is that by offering quote unquote free college, you wouldn't necessarily be able to get everybody through school. That's just not the way it would work. So anyway, so back to this article by Audrey here. So what she says is she says, cancel billions of dollars in student loan debt, giving tens of millions of Americans an immediate financial boost and helping to close the racial wealth gap. This is the single most effective executive action available to provide massive consumer driver stimulus, she wrote, along with other suggestions such as declaring climate crisis and so on and so forth. Now, what this was is this was actually a quote by, oh, you know what? I actually do not have the quote here. Let me see if I can pull that quote up. Oh, so that was actually a quote from Elizabeth Warren, talking about the, the 50,000 or so. And then Audrey goes on to say, AOC, Ayanna Pressley, Schumer, and other progressive Democrat lawmakers have made similar calls. Again, some of those are also going to push for, 100% loan forgiveness as well as free college. And so then Audrey goes into bring up several points that I wanted to make as far as bullet notes go, is that the loan forgiveness that is being proposed would actually benefit the top 40% of households. Now, exactly what that means is the top 40% of households, it's going to be based off of income, right? It's going to be based off of income, but it's also going to be based off of debt. And so, for example, a lot of the people who hold the majority of the debt are people who ended up going to go on to get advanced degrees. So, for example, your lawyers, your doctors, people who went to get PhDs, so on and so forth. Most PhD programs, I think, generally tend to kind of be sponsored or covered by the university because most of the time they're working through it. But a lot of times the people that are holding these debts are actually going to be people who hold those advanced degrees. And as a result, they also typically tend to have more higher paying jobs. So when she goes on to say that it would benefit the top 40% of households, that's mostly who she's talking about. These are people who are going to generally be more of your high earners. So rather than the bottom percentage of people really being able to get their debts wiped out, you're actually talking about wiping out a lot of the people, the debt for the people that are at the top. And to go back a little bit, where it talks about some of the other factors in terms of racial equality, class equality, so on and so forth. I personally don't plan to get into those types of topics. Again, it's a finance based podcast, and my brain works with numbers and it works with data, and so that's what I like to stick with, because when it comes to other topics and other facets of those discussions, to me that's kind of irrelevant. But again, that's the way that my brain works. I don't like to try to get sidetracked away from the data itself. So again, a few other bullet points that she mentions. Approximately 45 million people have student loan debt that totals about $1.6 trillion, which comes out to be about an average of $30,000 per student. And then Warren's plan would forgive up to $50,000 for houses making less than $100,000 a year, and then some of their debts erased for those that are over $100,000 a year. So it's kind of more of a graduated scale. And so what she's saying in here is that approximately 60% of households would only get about 34% of the benefit. Again, you're talking about houses that meet the threshold, but maybe they don't necessarily meet the debt threshold that is considered in here. And so she goes to say the top 40% of households owe about 60% of the debt, and then they make about 75% of the payments. And then the lowest 40% hold about 20% of the debt and only make about 10% of the payments. So again, you see a little bit of the disparity, and then obviously there's the group that's right there in the middle. And all in all, Elizabeth Warren plan would it would take out about $300 billion. And so it would add about $300 billion to the national debt, which at this point, I don't think anybody really cares about anymore. I think with the next stimulus package, we will probably get close to that $30 trillion mark in terms of the national debt. We should be concerned about it, but I think at this point in time, it's just a number. I think most people at this point are kind of focused, and they're just MMT believers, which is modern monetary theory, and so they don't really believe that the national debt, whether their argument is, the majority of the debt is owned by America, or whatever their arguments might be, they're not as concerned about the debt, whereas I am tend to be a little bit more concerned. So what she says is that, much like a lot of policy where it doesn't necessarily help those who it's intended to help, this would actually be a pretty big help for the people who are already doing okay and able to make the majority of their payments. And so what I also wanted to do was I wanted to take a look at some of the additional hazards that kind of go along with it. So in my head, I look at the student loan debt issue not necessarily as a national issue in terms of excuse me, the $1.6 trillion, which is terrible. I think the average payments that people are making every month is somewhere between $200 or $300. Which is a lot of money for a lot of people. I know us in our house, I don't have any student loan debt, but my wife does, and so she makes a little bit of payments on there every month as well. But I mean, it can be a pretty significant burden. But one of the things that I wanted to really kind of look at too was some of the additional hazards that go along with it. I know in the past we've discussed it, and by all means, please feel free to go back and listen to the podcast that I did that was on college and universities versus trade schools. I thought it was a great podcast. I thought there was a lot of great information in there. One of the big things that we talked about was the rise in tuition over the years. And then we also looked at it from a standpoint of, well, what were those salaries, right? What were the salaries that people were earning if they were to go into a 4-year degree? But then also too, if we were to switch to a scenario like we're discussing here, where $50,000 of student loan debt was forgiven, or maybe all student loan debt was forgiven, What would implications like that look like? And so what I did was I found another article. It was on Forbes. It was by a gentleman by the name of Robert Farrington, and it was titled "The Moral Hazard of Student Loan Forgiveness." Now, what he did was he broke it down into 5 problems. I don't actually address the first 3. I don't include them in my notes anyway, mostly because I think that they're kind of more emotional arguments. I don't think that they're, for example, I think one of them, well, I know one of them, but one of them was basically saying that we are rewarding people who took out debt, and then we're burdening people who either worked through college, who had their college paid for, who did do, like we discussed earlier, right, where they went to school part time. Maybe they did dual enrollment in high school, and then they went to community college, and then they transferred to a 4-year university and finished their degree there. So he was making arguments that was basically talking along those lines of saying, these are the types of people that we would be harming if we were to go this route. So again, to me, that's not necessarily a monetary financial issue. And so to me, I kind of wanted to push those off to the side. So what I did was I actually skipped to problem 4 and problem 5. So problem 4, he mentioned that knowing students get money that they don't need to pay, schools can take more students, they can offer more programs without concerns of value because they're not accountable for student debt, and neither is the student. And so that to me kind of started to get my wheels spinning in my head, because I'm like, well, that makes a lot of sense, because if I was a university and I wasn't concerned about money because I knew that I could just charge whatever I wanted, I would basically just have majors that would attract the most kids, right? And so the kids that would want to come in because we had the programs that they wanted, we had all the extracurricular activities, everything that they would want to do, because what that to me would be is that would be a source of revenue, right? So if I'm looking at that and I'm going, well, why would I want to be a research-based university that is priding ourselves on our hard academics, where maybe we have dropout rates, of fire up because the education is so tough and it's so hard, similar to, for those engineer listeners out there, as far as Calc 2, right? Calc 2 is a weed out course. Well, if you were a university and you were known as the Calc 2 of universities, that's a monetary stream of revenue that is probably going to fall through, because why would I want to go to your school and really work hard and push myself and potentially get the boot when these guys over here offer a similar program, but they're more concerned about how many people that they can get in because that's their revenue stream, right? And they have a lazy river. I'm poking fun at UCF because UCF has a lazy river, which I'm slightly jealous for, because I didn't get to enjoy the lazy river whenever I was there. But that's the kind of stuff that people would be looking at, right? They wouldn't necessarily be looking at, well, what's the school that's gonna really be the one that's gonna look the best for me on my resume and it's gonna challenge me and it's gonna push me. People are gonna want to say, well, I want to do, and if there's any psychology majors out there, I apologize, but maybe they want to go to college and they're like, well, maybe I want to be a psychologist. And then somebody goes, hey, we've got a psychology program, plus we've got a lazy river. Don't you want to come here? And so I think what would happen is that they would not necessarily be focused on offering the programs that would provide the most value. They're going to provide the programs that are really going to attract the most people. And the reason I say that is because people wouldn't necessarily be concerned as much about the value because there's not monetary incentive there. And again, being a finance-based podcast and thinking monetarily about that kind of thing, we've done shows as far as value creation when we did the entrepreneur episode, which I definitely encourage people to go back. That's what really kind of creates money, right? What really creates money is value, to where, I've got money, you have ice cream, right? I value that ice cream a little bit more than I value the money, so I'm willing to exchange it. But if I can have ice cream and I don't have to give you money, then there's no exchange there. There's not necessarily an additional value creation, and so it would really kind of mess up the whole system. And so the other issue that he brings up is it doesn't address rising costs. As costs continues to rise, students choose schools based on multiple criteria in terms of long-term earning potential. So what this would also be is this goes back to kind of the episode that we talked about when we compared colleges and universities versus trade schools. People go to school to be engineers, or they go to school, if you remember back, right? Actuaries, your engineers, your mathematicians, the people who really got complicated and difficult majors, because there's also financial incentive there, right? Their unemployment rate upon graduation is relatively low. And so if they're taking out significant loans, or if they're taking out or they're working really hard, or whatever it might be, they see a light at the end of the tunnel and they can go, hey, you know what? It's worth it over here because I'm going to make more money in the long run. And this is going to be value added, and I'm going to be able to create a life with low unemployment and so on and so forth. And so there's some benefits that go into being able to think about the long-term financial incentives. One of the other issues, and again, we talked about this before as well, was the inability to be able to declare bankruptcy and wipe out student loan debt. For example, this is critical for a lot of your big student loan holders, like your doctors, right? I happen to have a friend who is a surgeon, and he basically graduated medical school with something like $250,000 in student loan debt. Now, for him, that's terrible. I mean, I get it. I could get where someone is kind of like, hey, you know what? I don't want $250,000 of student loan debt. How about we make this free? Well, it might cost him $250,000, but then when no one is footing the bill for it and it's getting picked up by, Joe taxpayer, or whatever you want to refer to the tax base is that there's nothing to keep that in check, right? And to be honest, the part of the reason why a lot of those programs like medical school are costing $250,000 to go through, I won't even get into the federal backed student loan part. We'll get into that, here in a few minutes. But part of it also is because you might have 100 schools that want to have a medical school. They might say, hey, you know what? We want to have a medical school. We want to have so on and so forth to be able to kind of produce doctors, fill healthcare needs, whatever that need might be. But what ends up happening is out of those 100, 2 get approved. They meet certain criteria, or whatever that threshold might be. Maybe they only allow so many to be built at the same time, but there's like a regulation board that's going to say, these are the numbers that we're allowed to, not that we're allowed, but we are going to allow to be built. To give you a little bit of additional perspective, my sister is a dental hygienist. One of the issues that she ran into when she was younger was that the program that was local to her, and I think there might have been 2 or 3 in Orlando at the time, but they were only allowed to take so many students. And so when you have a city like Orlando, and if you were to total up all of the dental hygienist programs that were in the city, and only 100 students could be enrolled at any given time across these 3 campuses, you might have 500 people that would like to be a dental hygienist, but because they didn't get into that program, they have to figure out something else to do. And so what it does is it could also lead to labor shortages and really some really necessary fields. Now, the people who are already in those roles and in those industries, they might go, well, that's great. That's great for me because that means that my job is always going to be in demand. But what it does is it doesn't allow the market to actually reallocate resources where it's necessary. And so what you end up happen is you have a similar circumstance, but flipped to where you have a lot of people who graduate with degrees and there's not really anything there for it. So for example, I think I read something the other day that there are more people, and I'm sure it's probably across multiple degrees, but there are more people that graduate with performing arts degrees. So that's, music, theater, those types of degrees, then there are actual positions within those in the U.S. Now, again, whether or not that's true, I don't have the specific numbers right in front of me, but my guess is it's probably pretty close. I mean, if you were to assume, say, I don't know, 10,000 theater majors graduate a year, and then you look at, obviously, Broadway would kind of be the pinnacle of that, and there'd be more people graduating in a year than actually work on Broadway. So now the 10,000 number I made up, but you guys get the idea there. And one of the other things too that I wanted to address, and I didn't find that a lot of people, when I was doing the research on this, really mentioned it. We talked about it briefly just a couple of minutes ago when we were talking about the government-backed student loans, is the fact that what none of this really does is it really doesn't address the core problem of student loans. And the core problem of student loans is that it's basically backed by the US government, and it doesn't give any recourse for somebody to get out of it. And so what that does is it basically tells the universities, hey, we're going to give these guys all of this money to attend a college, and it doesn't matter if they graduate. It doesn't matter what they're doing post-graduation. It doesn't matter what they're doing while they're in school. That money's guaranteed. And so what the universities do, and as we mentioned in the last podcast about this, is that tuition is skyrocketing, right? Because what's going on is that these kids who are 18 years old, some of them get cosigners, some of them don't, but they're essentially getting tens of thousands of dollars in student loans. Now, if you were to go into a bank, and fortunately I haven't had to do this, but I'm sure there's probably some people that out there that have tried at least. If you were to go into a bank, or even if you went to somebody who you knew that was super wealthy, and you were like, look, I've got a proposal to you. I need $100,000. Now, I don't have a job. I don't have any collateral. I don't have any credit history because I'm only 18 years old. And I don't really know what I want to do. But I think $100,000 is the right number for me. I don't even think the bank would process your application, because they would go, I can't process this. You're not going to get approved. This is silly. And if you were to go to a financially successful person, you go, look, I would like a loan of $100,000, and you were to give them the same pitch, they would probably look at you like you're a crazy person. However, when it comes to student loans, there's no check on that, because it's backed by the federal government, and hence why now we've got $1.6 trillion in student loan debt, and a lot of people aren't making payments, or they're making underpayments, and the cost of tuition is continuing to skyrocket. And so one of the proposals that I actually read that I thought was pretty good was pointing out a lot of the endowments for especially your Ivy League schools, where Harvard and Yale and Princeton and those guys, I mean, they have endowments in the tens of billions of dollars. They have massive real estate holdings. They have literally everything that you could want in a business. I mean, the everything that you would want is there. But they are also not on the hook. So one of the proposals that I actually saw that I thought was pretty interesting was make the schools guarantee the loans. If you are making the school guarantee the loans, then what you would find is then right now it's the school's money. And so now what the school's going to do is the school's going to focus on graduation rates, right? Because they're going to want people to graduate. Now, a lot of universities do care about graduation rates, but I'm talking about graduation rates in terms of, hey, when these guys get out of school, what are they going to do? Because they have, maybe in that scenario, they have $75,000 that they're going to have to pay back to us. That's our money. So we need to make sure that not only are they graduating, but they're smart enough to be able to graduate and get a job that's going to be able to create enough value to someone somewhere where they're going to be able to pay back this loan. So I thought that proposal was really good. Again, it starts to get into a gray area because especially with state schools, so they're kind of owned and operated by the government, and you kind of get into a bit of a gray area as far as that. So that piece I would kind of have to think through a little bit. But also too, if you were to get the government out of the student loan game altogether, it goes back to the conversation that we just had where we were talking about going into the bank. Going into the bank and asking for $100,000 and not really having any clue what you're going to do with it is a very different story than going to the bank and saying, hey, you know what? I need $20,000. I don't have a job. I don't have any collateral, but this is what I can do. I can make X amount of payments because I'll be able to work part-time. This is what I want to go to school for, this is the type of income that I anticipate that I'll be able to make whenever I graduate. And you can work out a contract. That basically is going to say, hey, this is what my target is. This is what I anticipate to be, because then you've got skin in the game and the bank also has skin in the game. And so what you would also find too is that a bank's not going to give you $100,000, but maybe they'd be willing to give you 15. Or maybe 20 or something along those lines. But what you would also find is now the universities and the colleges aren't getting that $100,000 anymore, right? Now they're getting $15,000. Now they're getting $20,000. And so you would find that several things would have to happen. A lot of the like we discussed on the prior podcast, where a lot of the auxiliary roles and positions, they would have to clean a lot of that up, right? Because now if you are not directly contributing to these students' education, you might be overhead at that point. What kind of value are you creating to the university that's going to be able to help drive this revenue now that we're not getting, basically free $100,000, we're only getting 15 or 20. So it's something to think about as the discussion is going on. Right now nationally, when we're talking about student loan debt, I understand that a lot of people are burdened with student loan payments, and it just sounds like a great thing to just go, hey, you know what? You don't owe anything anymore. And there are people that are going to party, and there are people that are going to be celebrating. And at the end of the day, fiscally speaking, it would actually be good for our household. But when you look at it on a national basis, I personally do not believe that that's the way to go, because I don't think it's going to work out that way. I think what you would find is that tuition would absolutely skyrocket, because now that there's no grounding as far as the students being able to pay for it. But I also think too that on the flip side, you would have a lot of people who get very upset, especially if you were to introduce free college, when they realize that, hey, schools are now a lot more strict than who they let in, because they have a lot more applicants and that kind of thing. So I think what you would find is that the end result would not work out the way that anybody would want them to, and everyone is going to be surprised if it was to go this route of how it actually works out. So again, that's my take as far as the finance aspect and how it would impact people monetarily when it comes to student loan forgiveness. If you guys have any additional thoughts or any additional feedback, by all means, please feel free to let me know. Obviously, I'm always open to hearing feedback. If you like the show, again, share it with a friend, give it a like, give it a subscribe on YouTube or on wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we'll talk to you again next week. All right. Bye.